Good morning again, and unfortunately, RIAI President Kieran O'Connor is unable to be with us this morning. I know he's very sorry to be missing this discussion. I'm going to talk to you about the review of Ireland's National Development Plan. It's a framework to deliver capital investment to public funds to support economic growth and development across the country. The RIAI recently made a submission to government as part of the consultation process to review the National Development Plan. So in terms of context, it's estimated that by 2040, there will be an extra 1 million people living in Ireland. And this population growth will require hundreds of thousands of new jobs, new homes, more cultural and social amenities, better regional connectivity, and improved environmental sustainability. It was launched in 2018, and Project Ireland 2040 is the national plan to guide Ireland's development until 2040. It sets priorities, reinforcing values, and providing for this significant population growth. Project Ireland comprises of two key parts. Firstly, we have the National Development Plan, a 116 billion multi-year capital investment plan, which sets out a strategic framework for public capital investment from 2018 to 2027. The National Development Plan has a key role in enabling small and medium-sized cities across Ireland to achieve growth, prosperity, and a good quality of life for all, the theme of this conference. The second part of Project Ireland 2040 is a national planning framework. This sets the vision and strategy for the balanced development of our regional towns and cities over the next 20 years. In June 2020, the new government took office in Ireland and committed to bring forward a review of the National Development Plan to take account of the changed environment that Ireland is now facing, including the unprecedented impact of COVID-19, and also to better reflect the major priorities set out in the new programme for government. So these major priorities are aimed at tackling the most important challenges that are facing us as a nation, including climate action, supply of housing, transport infrastructure, balanced regional development, provision of healthcare, education resources, and development of our arts and cultural heritage. So in November, the review process of the National Development Plan, known as Review to Renew, was opened, and it intended that this renewed development plan will set out our capital investment framework until 2030. And the primary aims of the Review to Renew are to ensure that the overall level of capital investment planned for the future is set at the right level. Also to test whether the proposed allocation to government departments and sectors is correct, and to sense check what needs to change to meet Ireland's challenges more quickly and to fulfil the priorities of programme for government, including on housing, health, climate action and transport. So throughout this process of the National Development Plan review, the infrastructure projects which are already underway will continue to be developed and delivered. The RIAI submission on the Review to Renew public consultation of the National Development Plan focused on the theme of designing a lasting localised recovery. And to that end, a plan better, design better, build better approach is being suggested. So at the heart of the RIAI submission is a call for balanced economic recovery and the need to make planning and development work for recovery while also achieving sustainable, livable futures for cities, towns and rural areas. The post-COVID recovery must be designed to be robust, effective and ambitious. The recession triggered by the financial crisis in 2008 impacted severely on capital investment, employment across construction sectors and the provision of housing. The ensuing recovery was marked by chronic underinvestment, not just in housing, but equally in public infrastructure. And in Ireland, we saw economic growth and private sector investment soar between 2013 and 2018. However, public investment stayed at levels well below historical norms and the needs of the economy. Additionally, the recovery took so long to reach most of our town centres in rural Ireland that it had barely impacted before the COVID-19 crisis began. So now policymakers can correct these mistakes and those accumulated over decades in regional and local development and city, town and rural planning that have led to long commutes, high house prices and spatially imbalanced growth. To succeed in restoring hope and economic vibrancy to the towns, villages, city centres and suburban areas of Ireland, government policy will need to address challenges at 4 levels. Firstly, trends in population, housing and infrastructure. Secondly, regional trends in crisis and recovery. Thirdly, impacts on individual sectors and particularly on small businesses. And finally, sustainable development goals and climate change targets. Looking at trends in population, housing and infrastructure, planning and development frameworks must account for the demographic and related changes with regard to household size, housing mix, education, healthcare and others. High levels of public investment sustained over a sufficiently long period of time are required to compensate for a decade of under-provision in housing, public amenities and public infrastructure generally. For example, while the investment in housing grew between 2013 and 2019, it was from a very low base, and the rate of growth in the economy was 3 times faster. Looking at regional trends, recovery from the last financial crisis was not consistent or equally spread. It took rural and regional Ireland much longer to recover. In Dublin, pre-crisis levels of employment had been almost 100% restored by the first quarter of 2017, whereas employment in the state generally was only at 82.5% of the pre-crisis levels. So not only will regional and rural Ireland and some inner city areas take longer to recover from the impact of the pandemic, but it's likely that sectors worst affected by the crisis will require additional supports. As the 2019 Sheridan Public Consultation Committee report on small and medium-sized businesses in Ireland found, SMEs account for 65% of employment in Ireland, and 93.6% of those are Irish-owned. Crucially, for the design of locally and regionally focused recovery, 37% of SMEs are located in small towns and villages in rural Ireland. These small towns and villages are the most vulnerable in the current economic shock. We must support well-designed, durable and sustainable revitalisation of our towns and villages. So the current government has made climate action a high priority in terms of both legislative policy and spending commitments. The last recovery created unsustainable sprawl and as a result led to more expensive delivery of utilities and public services, and of course the adverse environmental and social costs of longer commutes. Unplanned sprawling development must give way to adoption of a proactive plan-led approach to achieve compact and sustainable use of existing underused building stock, as well as regeneration and development on vacant and infill sites in the hearts of our villages, towns, suburbs and inner cities. By shifting the emphasis from greenfield development to well-designed, imaginative infill and vacant urban site developments, and by aligning financial and local authority planning priorities accordingly, the coming recovery can revitalise towns and design and create places where customers want to use, businesses want to locate and invest in, and most importantly, where people want to live. By replacing short-term thinking with long-term sustainability planning, we can also marry the taxpayers' long-term interest with adherence to sustainable development goals, and particularly in climate action. And our architecture is an essential part of our environment and an essential part of our future development. It's time for a design-led strategy to transform our towns into beautiful places where people can both afford and want to live and work. To maximise the impact of such a strategy, challenges must be identified and addressed over the short-term, tactical, medium-term and policy over 2022 to 2028 period, and long-term strategic policy impacting from 2030 onwards, time horizons. So to that end, the RIAI submission proposed a time-tiered priorities in our submission to the National Development Plan review. So both the current programme for government and the most recent government budget published last October envisaged a cycle of normalisation from 2021 to 2023. Mindful of the need to propose improvements that are immediately practical and realisable, as well as more strategic and long-term, the RII submission sets out immediate policy actions as follows. Ring fencing of resources for local recovery investment, putting design into National Development Plan priorities, blending sustainability, including retrofit, capital spending priorities with town-centred recovery, and improving the management and governance of public investment. So in relation to the immediate policy priority 1, ring fencing resources, capital investment commitments for 2021 outlined in the most recent government budget merely restore spending to pre-2008 levels, but do not compensate for a decade during which investment was lower than it should have been. Population was growing rapidly and annual private sector investment grew by 2/3. The budget 2021 forecast for public investment for this year does not compensate for the lost decade in which annual public investment fell. Higher public investment will, if accompanied by intelligent design and planning, raise economic value in our towns and village centres, restore employment and achieve climate targets, thus lowering fiscal pressures in the near and distant future. Immediate policy area 2, the National Development Plan is described by the government as its plan to invest in infrastructure to support economic, social, environmental and cultural development. An immediate and urgent priority must be to add to this list that the architectural and planning development of our towns and village centres. Like no other time since perhaps the 1950s, the denudation of our town and village centres is now the greatest obstacle to restoring employment, social cohesion and civic morale in regional towns and cities. These centres need architectural planning and urban design expertise and experience and excellence to become sustainable economic hubs and places that are attractive to living, visiting and working. Capital spending should explicitly prioritise well-designed town and village centred investment for effective and regionally balanced recovery. Rejuvenation of towns and villages is a primary objective of public spending, and it follows that individual departmental project budgets need to serve this aim. To that end, the siloed departmental system of classifying capital spending under housing, education, health separately needs to be complemented by a cross-cutting town and village centred system of allocation that identifies for each departmental area how much investment is relevant to the rejuvenation of towns and villages most affected by the crisis. Specifically, the government's approach to town and village rejuvenation at national. Specifically, the government should adopt and implement with local authority, government department and agency buy-in and coordination actions, including adopting a whole government approach to town and village rejuvenation at national, regional and local level. Develop a data-driven view of individual towns as a basis for prioritising actions and providing evidence-based planning decisions and assessing planning outcomes. Ensure that design is an integral skill within the regional and local authorities and that professional architects are part of the management structure of all local authorities, with responsibility to manage, plan and coordinate all public investment decisions as part of an interdisciplinary team. Also, to consider the establishment of a national placemaking agency to oversee a national evidence base and methodology for mapping and understanding urban centres, similar to the Scottish Town Partnership, so that we can inform strategic design plans and then also to assess planning outcomes. Immediate priority area 3, blending sustainability retrofit, capital spending priorities with a town-centred recovery. Often one of the most damaging aspects of development and planning in Ireland has been its often siloed nature. Increasingly, we need to integrate and fuse different aspects of policy together in a cohesive way. Capital spending should ensure the holistic provision of housing and sustainable urban development that is clearly focused on the town centre, facilitating retrofit, infill and brownfield development that links the core to outlying residential and retail centres via environmentally sustainable public transport. The RIAI recommends spending that will facilitate the creation of neighbourhoods where people can live, work and have schools, public transport and other daily services within a 15-minute walk of their homes. Immediate policy area 4, improving the management and governance of public investment. This is arguably the most pressing of all the issues. At the core of these objectives is a need in the short to medium term to better translate the intentions of county development plans into cohesive implementable objectives, to incentivise sustainable compact urban development as opposed to continued car-dependent, low-density suburban out-of-town sprawl, and to enable procurement to channel spending into local businesses with a stake in and knowledge of their areas. It must be recognised that whilst urban sprawl is a prima facie cheapest form of housing delivery, this is because the associated negative externalities are not fully addressed in the build cost. More sustainable forms of development require upfront financial investment. However, this investment will pay future dividends with respect to reducing other costs, such as public transport and other ongoing servicing costs, environmental costs, societal costs, and reducing negative externalities. In addition, public procurement must be reformed to cut complexity and unnecessary bid costs, avoid barriers to entry by micro and SMEs, and improve feedback and standardisation, thus enabling participation in recovery investment by architects and other construction consultants who know their local needs. Moving on then to the medium-term challenges. While short-term improvements in decision-making must be secured, a range of policy mistakes accumulated over decades will require a longer time span to address. They include the removal of local authority ability to independently raise finance and have responsibility for autonomous decision-making 4 decades ago. Weaknesses in the design and implementation of county. So the removal of local authorities' ability to independently raise finances is an enormous issue, and their responsibility for autonomous decision-making for the last 4 decades. Also, weaknesses in the design and implementation of county development plans, lack of local participation in the design and implementation of development, the focus on big retail development at the expense of cultivating the hearts of our towns and villages, and the failure to adequately link so many of our towns and villages with adequate public transport, and many more. So county development plans must be implemented with clear objectives and definitions, for example, of the town centre, and stronger, more streamlined local authority and interdepartmental coordination. Development plans must be better fit for purpose to the needs to include 3-dimensional mixed-use spatial strategies beyond the current 2-dimensional monofunctional zoning map type planning. Plans should incorporate strategic development objectives that are cross-sectoral, incorporating placemaking, town centre regeneration, provision of new housing, sustainable movement, green infrastructure, cultural heritage, sport, health and education. And government should examine how taxation of housing can be reformed to support town centre development. Town centre housing and amenity development must be driven with a long-term public interest perspective, aided by active local participation and greater regional and interdepartmental coordination. The benefits of these measures to promote efficient, cohesive design and implementation of sustainable development are self-evident. Long-term then, there are 3 areas of long-term reform that government should consider in reshaping the national planning framework: governance, planning and financing. In all 3, benchmarking Irish practice with learning from best-in-class EU examples should be implemented over a long time period. Ireland should set and pursue long-term targets that emulate best practice in relation to municipal planning, financing and design models, civic partnerships and mutual learning. Key to achieving this type of international learning is government support for research and data gathering on the built environment to inform development strategies and to assess the planning outcomes. Centres of academic research, such as the University College Dublin Centre for Irish Towns, should be supported to drive innovation and to deliver best practice. So Ireland has suffered in the past from the lack of long-term planning, a lack of synthesis between local and national policy priorities, and a lack of coordination between local and national policy-making structures. The National Development Plan commits significant resources to address deficits in housing provision and infrastructure, and we have an opportunity now to correct some of the mistakes of the past and create a different future for our citizens. So the RIAI has laid out in our submission ways in which we believe the government can do this, and we implore them to take this on board. So just in closing, and on behalf of the RIAI, I would like to acknowledge all of those who contributed to the submission. We had invaluable input from a wide range of RIAI members across our housing, sustainability, urban design, universal design, practice and executive committees, which I think demonstrates the potential reach and impact of the National Development Plan. I'd also like to thank Miriam Delaney of the Free Market, who brought a skilled perspective to bear. And finally, to thank Mark Coleman of Octavian Consultancy, who was integral in bringing all of the contributions together. So thank you very much.